3 days later, the palace held a trial. Lord Pemberton stood in chains before the royal court. Nobles filled the gallery. Whispers spread like wildfire. A cousin of the king. A traitor. The scandal would echo for years. The evidence was overwhelming. The assassin confessed everything in exchange for a lighter sentence. He named Pemberton as the one who hired him, who paid him, who promised him wealth and protection. Pemberton's servants testified that he had left his chambers that night, that he had been gone for over an hour. His lies unraveled thread by thread. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty of high treason, the punishment was exile. The king could have ordered execution, but he chose mercy. Pemberton would be stripped of his title, his lands, and his wealth. He would be escorted to the northern border and banished forever. Thomas watched as guards led Pemberton away. The man who had once walked these halls with pride now shuffled in chains. His face was hollow. Defeated justice had been served. But it left a bitter taste. That evening, the king called Thomas to his private study. It was the first time Thomas had seen the room up close. Books lined the walls. Maps covered a large oak desk. A fire crackled in the hearth. The king poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to Thomas. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair. Thomas sat, feeling out of place. He was used to standing, to waiting, not sitting across from the king like an equal. "I've been thinking about that night," the king said. He swirled the wine in his glass. "About what would have happened if you hadn't believed Charlotte." Thomas took a sip. The wine was rich and warm. "Someone else might have stopped them." "Maybe," the king said, "or maybe I'd be dead, and Pemberton would be sitting on this throne, convincing everyone that my death was an accident, a tragedy." The thought hung heavy in the air. The king set down his glass. "I've made mistakes, Thomas. I trusted the wrong people. I ignored warning signs. I let ambition fester in my own court." He looked Thomas in the eye. "But you didn't ignore the warning? You listened to a frightened child when everyone else dismissed her." "She deserved to be heard," Thomas said simply. "Yes, she did." The king leaned back. "That's why I'm making changes. The guard will be expanded. New protocols for vetting staff. And you'll be in charge of it all." Thomas nodded slowly. It was a massive responsibility, but he was ready for it. "There's something else," the king said. He reached into his desk and pulled out a small wooden box. He slid it across to Thomas. "Open it." Thomas opened the box. Inside was a medal, gold, with the royal crest engraved in the center. Below it, an inscription, "For courage and loyalty." "This is for you," the king said. "But more importantly, I'm awarding a medal to Charlotte as well. For her bravery, she'll be recognized at the next royal ceremony." Thomas felt a lump in his throat. "She'll be so proud." "She should be," the king said. "She saved my life as much as you did." They talked for another hour, about the future, about security, about rebuilding trust in the palace. By the time Thomas left, the fire had burned down to embers. The next morning, Thomas found Charlotte in the palace garden. She sat on a stone bench feeding crumbs to a cluster of birds. The sun shone through the trees, casting dappled light on the grass. "Captain Brennan," she said brightly when she saw him. She jumped off the bench and ran over. Thomas smiled. "Good morning, Your Highness. Mama told me you're in charge of all the guards now," Charlotte said. Her eyes sparkled. "Does that mean you'll always be here?" "It does," Thomas said. "I'll be here to keep you and your family safe." Charlotte beamed. Then she looked down at her hands, suddenly shy. "I wanted to say thank you." "For believing me?" Thomas knelt down so they were at the same height. "You don't have to thank me. You were brave enough to speak up. That's what mattered." "But no one else listened," Charlotte said quietly. "Lady Margot thought I was making it up. The other guards didn't believe me either." Thomas placed a hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes people are too busy or too distracted to hear what's right in front of them, but that doesn't mean you stop speaking. You did the right thing, Charlotte. You trusted your instincts, and because of that, your father is still here." Charlotte's eyes welled up. She threw her arms around Thomas's neck and hugged him tightly. "You're a hero," she whispered. Thomas hugged her back, his chest tight with emotion. "So are you." When she finally pulled away, she was smiling again. "Will you teach me how to be brave like you?" Thomas laughed. "You're already brave, but I can teach you how to be strong, how to protect the people you love." "I'd like that," Charlotte said. Over the following months, the palace returned to normalcy. But it was a different kind of normal. Security was tighter. Trust was earned, not assumed. And Thomas led the guard with a steady hand. He trained new recruits. He walked the halls every night, just as he always had. But now, he looked at every shadow differently. He listened more carefully. He trusted his instincts. And every week, he spent an hour with Charlotte, teaching her basic self-defense, telling her stories of courage, reminding her that her voice mattered. One evening, nearly a year after that fateful night, Thomas stood on the palace balcony overlooking the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The kingdom below was peaceful. The king joined him, standing at the railing. "Beautiful, isn't it?" "It is," Thomas agreed. "I've been thinking," the king said, "about legacy, about what we leave behind." He paused. Pemberton wanted power. He thought the crown would give him meaning. But he was wrong. "What gives meaning, then?" Thomas asked. The king smiled. "Doing the right thing when no one's watching. Listening when everyone else turns away. Protecting those who can't protect themselves." He looked at Thomas. "You understand that? Charlotte understands that. That's the legacy that lasts." Thomas nodded. He thought about that night. About the whisper behind the curtain. About the choice he made to believe a frightened child. It was such a small moment. Such a simple decision. But it changed everything. The king clapped him on the shoulder. "Thank you, Thomas." "For everything. Always, Your Majesty." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Inside the palace, in her chambers, Charlotte sat at her desk. She was writing in a journal. The page was titled, "The Night I Saved Papa." She wrote carefully, her young hand forming each letter with precision. She wrote about the man in black, about running through the halls, about the guard who knelt down and said, "I believe you." At the bottom of the page, she drew a picture. A tall guard with kind eyes, standing beside a little girl. Above them, she wrote, "Heroes come in all sizes." She closed the journal and smiled. Outside her window, the stars began to appear. The palace stood strong and safe, and somewhere in those stone corridors, a guard walked his rounds, listening carefully to every sound, because he knew now, more than ever, that sometimes the smallest voice carries the most important message, and all it takes is one person willing to listen. King Edward's face hardened. He stood slowly, Charlotte still clinging to his side. "Explain." Thomas told him everything. Charlotte's whisper behind the curtain. The two men near the council chambers. The conversation about Lord Pemberton. The fight. The escape of the second conspirator. The king listened in silence. His jaw tightened with every word. When Thomas finished, the king placed a hand on Charlotte's head. "You were very brave tonight," he said softly. Then he looked at Marcus. "Assemble the guard. Lock down the palace. No one enters or leaves. And bring me Lord Pemberton." Marcus nodded and left quickly. King Edward turned to Thomas. "You believed her when no one else did." Thomas glanced at Charlotte. She looked up at him with those wide, grateful eyes. "She was telling the truth, Your Majesty. I could see it. Most wouldn't have listened," the king said. "Most would have sent her back to bed." He paused. "You may have saved my life tonight." Thomas bowed his head. "I was only doing my duty," no, the king said firmly. "You did more than duty. You acted with courage and judgment. That's rare." Within minutes, the palace came alive. Guards rushed through hallways. Doors were locked. Torches were lit. The sound of boots on stone echoed everywhere. The king took Charlotte to the queen's chambers, where Queen Helena held her daughter close and wept with relief. Then he returned to the throne room, where Thomas and a dozen other guards waited. Lord Pemberton was brought in 20 minutes later. He wore a velvet coat and an expression of annoyance. "Your Majesty, what is the meaning of this?" "I was dragged from my bed like a common criminal." The king sat on his throne, his face unreadable. "Where were you tonight between the hours of 11 and midnight?" Pemberton blinked. "In my chambers, of course. Asleep." "Anyone who can confirm that?" the king asked. "My servants, naturally." Pemberton's voice carried a hint of indignation. "Why are you asking me this?" The king didn't answer. Instead, he gestured to Marcus. "Bring in the prisoner." 2 guards dragged in the tall man Thomas had fought. His hands were bound, blood crusted on his forehead. His eyes darted around the room nervously. Pemberton's face went pale. "Do you know this man?" the king asked. Pemberton hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. "No," he said quickly. "I've never seen him before." The king leaned forward. "Interesting. Because he knows you." He nodded to Marcus. Marcus stepped forward. "This man was captured attempting to enter your study, Your Majesty. Before his capture, he was overheard speaking about payment from Lord Pemberton. Half before the job. Half after?" Pemberton's mouth opened, then closed. His hands trembled. "That's absurd. This man is lying. You can't trust the word of a criminal over my own daughter," the king said coldly. The room went silent. Pemberton's face crumbled. His shoulders sagged. For a moment, he looked like he might deny it again. But then something broke inside him. He laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. "You don't understand?" Pemberton said. "You never did." "Then help me understand," the king said. Pemberton looked up. His eyes were red. "I've served this family my entire life. I sat in every council meeting. I advised you on every decision. And what did I get? A title with no power. A seat at a table where my voice meant nothing." His voice grew louder. "You are going to name your son as heir. A child who hasn't even been born yet. While I, your own blood, was cast aside." The king's expression didn't change. "So you decided to kill me?" "I decided to take what should have been mine," Pemberton said. "The throne, the crown, the respect I deserved. And you were willing to murder your own cousin for it." Pemberton said nothing. He just stared at the floor. The king stood. "Take him to the dungeons. He'll stand trial for treason." Guards moved forward and grabbed Pemberton by the arms. He didn't resist. As they dragged him away, he looked back at Thomas. "You ruined everything," he said quietly. "One guard. One stupid, loyal guard." Thomas met his eyes. "I was just doing my job." Pemberton was taken away. The heavy doors closed behind him with a boom that echoed through the throne room. The king turned to Thomas. "Step forward." Thomas obeyed. He felt the eyes of every guard in the room on him. The king descended the steps and stood before him. "Kneel," the king said. Thomas dropped to one knee. His heart raced. He didn't know what was coming. The king drew his ceremonial sword. The blade gleamed in the torchlight. He placed it on Thomas's right shoulder, then his left. "For your bravery, your loyalty, and your service to the crown, I name you captain of the royal guard. You will lead the men who protect this palace and this family."
Ow.
The king lifted the sword. "Rise, Captain Brennan." Thomas stood slowly. His legs felt weak. Around him, the other guards began to clap. The sound grew louder, filling the room. The king extended his hand. Thomas shook it, still in shock. "Thank you," the king said quietly. "You saved my life. And you listened when no one else would." Thomas nodded, unable to find words. Later that night, after the palace had settled and the guards had returned to their posts, Thomas found himself standing outside Charlotte's chambers. The door was slightly open. He could hear Queen Helena singing a lullaby. He peeked inside. Charlotte lay in her bed, tucked under thick blankets. Her eyes were closed. She looked peaceful. The queen noticed him and smiled. She walked over quietly. "She asked about you," the queen said. "She wanted to make sure you were safe." Thomas felt a warmth in his chest. "She's a brave girl." "She is," the queen agreed. and she has a good judge of character. She knew you would listen. Thomas looked back at Charlotte. I'm glad I did. The queen placed a hand on his arm. So are we, Captain. She closed the door gently. Thomas stood there for a moment longer, then turned and walked back down the hallway. The palace was quiet again. But this time, it was a peaceful quiet, the kind that comes after a storm has passed. The stone halls of Ashford Palace were silent that night. Too silent. Guard Thomas Brennan had walked these corridors for 11 years, and he knew the difference between peaceful quiet and the kind that comes before something breaks. He adjusted his grip on the halberd and kept moving. His boots echoed against marble floors that had seen 3 centuries of kings. Paintings of stern-faced royals stared down at him from gilded frames. The air smelled of old wood and candle wax. Then he heard it. A small sound. Almost nothing. A whisper. Thomas stopped. His pulse quickened. The sound came from behind the velvet curtain near the West Wing entrance. He moved toward it slowly, his weapon ready. The curtain shifted. A tiny hand appeared at the edge. Please, the voice said. Please listen. Thomas pulled the curtain back. A little girl sat curled against the wall, her knees pulled to her chest. She wore a white nightgown embroidered with golden thread. Her dark hair fell in tangles around her face. Her eyes were wide and wet with tears. Princess Charlotte, 7 years old, daughter of King Edward and Queen Helena, Your Highness, Thomas said, lowering his weapon immediately. He dropped to one knee. What are you doing here? You should be in your chambers. Charlotte shook her head quickly. Her small hands gripped the fabric of her gown. I can't go back there, she said. Her voice trembled. He'll find me. Thomas felt a cold weight drop into his stomach. Who will find you? The girl looked up at him. Her lip quivered. The man who wants to hurt Papa? Before you keep watching, if you love emotional true stories like this, hit that subscribe button. You won't regret it. Thomas glanced down the empty hallway. No one else was near. The palace held over 300 rooms, and on a quiet Tuesday night like this, most guards were stationed at the outer gates or the throne room. He looked back at Charlotte. Tell me what you saw, he said gently. Charlotte wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I woke up because I was thirsty. I wanted water, so I opened my door just a little. She paused. Her breathing was quick and shallow. I saw a man in the hallway. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He was dressed in black. All black. Thomas's chest tightened. Where did he go? Toward the council chambers, Charlotte whispered. I heard him talking to someone. He said the king would never see morning. The words hung in the air like smoke. Thomas felt his mind racing. The king, a threat. Inside the palace walls. But who would believe a 7-year-old girl? Did you tell anyone else? Thomas asked. Charlotte nodded. I ran to find Mama's lady-in-waiting, Lady Margot. I told her everything. The girl's face crumpled. She said I was having a bad dream. She told me to go back to bed and stop making up stories. Thomas clenched his jaw. He wanted to be angry at Lady Margot, but he understood. Palace staff were trained to dismiss panic, to keep order. A child's imagination was easy to ignore. But Thomas had been a soldier before he became a palace guard. He had served in the border wars. He knew what real fear looked like. And this child was terrified. I believe you, he said quietly. Charlotte looked up at him. Hope flickered in her eyes. You do? I do. Thomas stood and held out his hand. But we need to move quickly. Can you take me to where you saw the man? Charlotte hesitated. Then she nodded and took his hand. Her small fingers were cold. They moved through the corridors together, staying close to the walls. The palace felt different now. Every shadow seemed darker. Every creak of floorboards sounded like a footstep. Charlotte stopped suddenly. She pointed ahead. There, she whispered. That's where I saw him. Thomas looked. The hallway led to the east wing. The council chambers were at the end, and beyond that, the king's private study. His blood ran cold. If someone wanted to kill the king, That's exactly where they would go. Asterisk Thomas guided Charlotte back behind a marble column. He knelt down to her eye level. I need you to stay here, he said firmly. Don't move. Don't make a sound. If anything happens, run to the guard station at the main entrance. Do you understand? Charlotte nodded, but her eyes were full of fear. What are you going to do? I'm going to find this man, Thomas said, and I'm going to stop him. He stood and moved forward, keeping his steps light. The halberd felt heavy in his hands. His heart pounded against his ribs. 11 years of standing at doors and walking empty hallways, and now this. A real threat. A real test. The corridor stretched before him. Moonlight streamed through tall windows, painting silver stripes across the floor. He passed portraits of old kings. Their painted eyes seemed to watch him. Then he heard voices low, hushed, coming from around the corner near the council. Chambers. Thomas pressed himself against the wall and edged closer. He could make out 2 figures. Both wore dark clothing. One was tall and broad-shouldered. The other was thinner, nervous. They stood near a side door that led to the king's study. The lock is simple, the tall one said. His voice was rough, like gravel. We go in, finish the job, and we're gone before the guard rotation changes. What about witnesses? The thin one asked. There won't be any. The king works alone after midnight. Always has. Thomas's stomach turned. They knew the king's habits, his schedule. This wasn't a random attack. It was planned, calculated, and the payment. The thin man said, half now. Half when it's done? Lord Pemberton keeps his promises. Thomas froze. Lord Pemberton, the king's own cousin? A man who sat at the royal table, who attended every council meeting. A traitor, Thomas needed to act. But he was 1 man against 2. And if he failed, if they killed him and got to the king, Charlotte would have been right all along. And no one would know until it was too late. He took a slow breath and made a choice. He stepped out from the shadows. Stop where you are. Both men spun around. The tall one's hand flew to his belt. A dagger gleamed in the moonlight. Who are you? The man growled. Palace guard, Thomas said. His voice was steady, but his pulse hammered in his ears. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit treason. The thin man laughed nervously. You're alone. No backup, no witnesses. Just you. Thomas raised his halberd. That's all I need. The tall man smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the smile of someone who had killed before. Big mistake, guard. He lunged forward, dagger aimed at Thomas's chest. Thomas twisted to the side and brought the shaft of his halberd down hard. It cracked against the man's wrist. The dagger clattered to the floor. The thin man turned and ran. Thomas let him go. He had to focus on the immediate threat. The tall man snarled and threw a punch. Thomas blocked it with his forearm and shoved him back. The man stumbled but recovered quickly. He was fast-trained. They circled each other in the narrow hallway. The man feinted left, then came in low. Thomas sidestepped and swung the halberd. The blade missed by inches. The man grabbed the shaft and yanked. Thomas held on, but the force pulled him forward. They crashed into the wall. Thomas's shoulder hit stone. Pain shot through his arm. The man drove his knee up toward Thomas's ribs. Thomas twisted just in time. The knee hit his hip instead. It still hurt, but not enough to stop him. Thomas headbutted the man, hard. The crack echoed in the hall. The man's grip loosened. Thomas ripped the halberd free and swung the blunt end. It connected with the man's temple. The assassin dropped like a sack of grain. Thomas stood over him, breathing hard. His hands shook. He looked down at the unconscious man and felt a wave of relief. But it was short-lived. The thin man had run. He knew someone was onto them. And if he reached Lord Pemberton before Thomas could warn the king, everything would fall apart. Thomas turned and ran back toward Charlotte. She was still behind the column, her eyes wide. Is it over? She asked. Not yet, Thomas said. He grabbed her hand. We need to get to your father. Now. They ran through the palace. past tapestries and statues, past empty rooms and locked doors. Charlotte's small legs struggled to keep up, but she didn't complain. She held his hand tightly and kept moving. They reached the main staircase. 2 guards stood at the top. Thomas recognized them. Marcus and Aldrich. "Good men, Thomas," Marcus said, confused. "What's going on?" "Assassination attempt," Thomas said quickly. "On the king. I need to see him immediately." Aldrich stepped forward. "That's a serious accusation." "You can't just a child witness the conspirators," Thomas interrupted. He gestured to Charlotte. "The princess herself." 2 men were heading to his study. One is unconscious near the council chambers. The other ran. "We need to secure the king now." Marcus and Aldrich exchanged a glance. Then Marcus nodded. "I'll take you to him." They climbed the stairs and moved through another hallway. The king's private wing was quieter. Guarded by only 1 man at the final door, Marcus explained the situation. The guard's face went pale. He knocked on the door. "Your Majesty, there's an urgent matter." A moment passed. Then the door opened. King Edward stood in the doorway, wearing a simple robe. He held a book in one hand. His face showed confusion, then alarm when he saw Charlotte. "Papa!" Charlotte cried. She broke free from Thomas and ran to her father. The king knelt and caught her in his arms. "Charlotte, what is this? What's happening?" Thomas stepped forward and bowed. "Your Majesty, there's been a plot against your life.